It was a place of healing, a major teaching hospital right in the heart of Kolkata RG Chemical College and Hospital.
A place you're supposed to trust.
Exactly. But on the morning of August 9th, 2024, that trusted institution, it instantly transformed into something else.
Something else entirely. A compromised crime
The
scene.
victim. She was a second-year postgraduate trainee, a PGT.
Right. Found in a seminar hall after just finishing a grueling 36-hour shift. I mean, she was exhausted, vulnerable, and what came next was just a stunning display of institutional failure.
The narrative that the hospital administration first gave to her family was a lie.
A flat-out lie.
They claimed she had committed suicide, but that story, it just collapsed almost immediately under the weight of the evidence.
And, just the common sense of the doctors who first found her, they knew.
They knew.
Our sources for this, they map out a really profound tragedy. And it reveals not just the details of a terrible crime from one perpetrator, Sanjay Roy, but also these layers of systemic incompetence.
Potential conspiracy, even.
Yes. And an administrative rot that extended deep into the state's governance structure.
Okay, well, let's unpack all of this. Our mission today is to really understand the anatomy of a systemic failure through this one case. We need to dissect why the crime scene was so deliberately or, negligently compromised.
And what the forensic trail revealed.
Especially that DNA evidence. It was just incontrovertible.
Absolute.
And maybe most importantly, how this one single tragedy forced massive legislative reform in India. We are here to synthesize this dense, sometimes pretty shocking material for you, the learner, to try and give you the clarity that, well, the initial chaos denied everyone involved.
And we should start with those critical hours right after the discovery. That's where you can map the exact timeline of negligence and potential cover-up that almost derailed the whole pursuit of justice.
All right, let's start by setting the scene on that fateful night. The victim, she was a highly ambitious young doctor, a second-year PGT, a postgraduate trainee. For anyone who might not be familiar with the Indian medical system, what does that role actually entail in a place like our G-CAR?
So a PGT is essentially what many would call a resident doctor. But their life is just defined by intense, relentless duty.
Just nonstop.
Nonstop. They're constantly learning, constantly working, and often pulling these shifts that stretch way beyond 24 hours. The victim had just completed one of those, a marathon shift, 36 hours. She was just trying to get some rest.
In that context, her sheer exhaustion is so vital here, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Because it speaks directly to her vulnerability at the moment of the attack.
And there was a custom in the chess department that the seniors had provided dinner for the group that night.
That's right. The sources are pretty clear about her last known movements. She had dinner with 4 of her colleagues, Dr. Ghulam Azam, Dr. Arko Sen, Dr. Sanjoy Roy, and Dr. Subhadeep Singh Mahapatra. They were all in the seminar room.
And this was late.
Very late. Around 12:45 a.m., maybe 1:0 a.m. on August 9th. The court, by the way, later found their testimonies to be consistent and credible.
I imagine the defense tried to challenge that.
They did. They tried to sow confusion about the exact time dinner ended, but the judge just dismissed it. Confirmed these were just colleagues, doing their duties. They had no connection to the crime at all.
So she finishes her dinner, and then, completely exhausted from a day and a half of nonstop work, she tries to get some rest. Hours later, she's discovered. What did the witnesses who found her actually see?
The discovery was made around 9:30 in the morning, and the witnesses, they included Dr. Pooja Rai and Dr. Arko Sen. They described a profoundly disturbing scene. She was lying dead on a mattress that was on the dais in that seminar room.
And the description of how she was found is key.
It's crucial. They described her position as very unnatural. She was half naked, her top had been pushed sharply upwards, exposing her lower limbs and her abdomen.
This was not the position of someone who died naturally.
Not at all. Or a suicide. This immediately screamed violence.
So the very first people on the scene, her own colleagues, her fellow doctors, they immediately suspected foul play.
Immediately.
And yet the college authorities, the principal, the MSVP, they went straight to the family with the suicide story.
And that's the initial lie that we really have to dissect.
It's the moment the institutional suspicion, hardens into a fact.
It is. The college administration, without even notifying the police, without waiting for any kind of autopsy, they told the victim's family she had taken her own life.
Just an incredible step to take.
And this attempt to push a false narrative, it just immediately triggered outrage and, profound suspicion among her family and the entire medical community.
And we know for a fact that this narrative was actively rejected by senior doctors who knew what they were looking at.
Precisely. We have the testimony of PW6, Dr. Sanjoy Roy Tapadar. He was the victim supervisor. He was one of the first senior medical professionals on the scene, and he instantly suspected sexual assault and murder. This was around 10:00 a.m.
So an hour or so after she's found.
Yes. And his next steps, they reveal the depth of the institutional impediment that was about to be thrown up.
What were his steps, and how did the leadership react?
Well, Dr. Tapadar immediately tried to contact the principal, Dr. Sandeep Ghosh, and the MSVP, Dr. Sanjay Bassist. He needed to report this obvious unnatural death and the urgent need for police.
So he's doing his job.
She's trying to. He called both of them around 10:00, 10:30 a.m. Neither of them answered his calls.
Wow.
He was forced to resort to sending an urgent SMS to the principal, just a text message.
A text message about a potential murder on their campus.
And the court later delivered just a stinging, uncompromising condemnation of both Dr. Ghosh and Dr. Bassist. They failed in their legal duty. They never sent the official intimation that's required for an unnatural death to the police.
Which suggests it's not just negligence.
It indicates something more. It's either deliberate apathy or, perhaps something worse, at the very highest levels of the hospital's executive team. It looks like they were trying to bury the reality of what happened from the very first minute.
And the rot didn't stop with the hospital. The police response, which it should have been to secure the scene, start the investigation, it was just as compromised.
It was, and that led directly to these allegations of cover-up and procedural fraud.
The fraud starts almost immediately, doesn't it, at the Tulla police station?
Yes. They initially registered what's called an unnatural death, or a UD case. UD case number 8612024. This is sort of a preliminary step for any death that isn't clearly natural.
But the formal first information report, the FIR, which is what actually kicks off the criminal investigation based on the family's complaint, that was filed massively late.
Massively. The FIR, based on the father's desperate complaint, wasn't filed until 11:45 that night.
At night.
At night.
Yeah.
The police made the parents wait until 6:00 p.m. just to lodge the complaint. They effectively wasted critical hours of evidence preservation.
And the explanation for this delay, it just revealed this active procedural manipulation. This is where it gets really interesting with the cover-up allegations.
It's a stunning insight into institutional corruption, really. A police sub-inspector later testified in court to a shocking truth.
Which was what?
That they had collected a blank unnatural death case number from the register, that same UD case number 861, and then they entered the seizure data after 11:30 p.m.
Wait, so they backdated it?
Essentially. They did this despite having received the death certificate from the hospital at 2:00 p.m. that afternoon.
That is bureaucratic fraud in real time.
And the judge didn't mince words. He called this act illegal indifferent. It strongly suggests the local police were actively manipulating the official documentation and the timeline to obscure the true sequence of events.
And to minimize the gravity of the crime, right from the very start.
Exactly.
So, okay, we have the hospital trying to push a suicide story, and we have the local police manipulating official records, and all the while, the most critical location, the crime scene itself, was just wide open.
The failure to secure the scene of crime, the SOCI, is one of the most damning findings of this whole affair. The CBI status report, which was later presented to the Supreme Court, it heavily criticized this lack of security.
What did it say?
The report stated, and this is a quote, that the officer in charge of Tulla PS, a man named Abhijit Mandal, failed to cordon scene of crime, SOS, and this allowed unauthorized persons access and caused damage of vital evidences.
So Abhijit Mandal's failure to just put up tape and maintain security is precisely why so much of that initial physical evidence was potentially lost or compromised.
It's negligence that really borders on complicity.
And the allegations of tampering, they didn't stop when the investigation was transferred. In fact, they almost seemed to ramp up.
They did, which reinforces this idea of an institutional panic to destroy evidence. Within hours of the Calcutta High Court ordering the investigation be transferred to the CBI, which is a sign of the court's complete lack of trust in the state police.
Right.
The State Public Works Department, the PWD, attempted to renovate a room adjacent to the seminar room crime scene.
You're kidding?
No, it's highly suspicious behavior.
And then there's the final cruel act that really cemented the public's fear of a complete cover-up, the hasty cremation.
Exactly. The handling of the victim's remains was deeply, deeply problematic. Her body was cremated quickly under what was described as Complete police cover.
And this was against the family's wishes.
It completely overrode the desperate demands from her parents and the growing public for a second, independent autopsy. This rapid cremation, it severely limited any future forensic opportunities the CBI might have wanted to use, and it just added intense fuel to the public speculation about a high-level institutional cover-up.
It really paints a picture where multiple arms of the state, the hospital administration, the local police, the PWD, they all appeared to be acting in a coordinated way. Whether that was through malicious intent or just staggering negligence, the goal seemed to be to obscure the facts in those first 48 hours.
And what's fascinating here is that the systemic rot was so visible, it was so widespread, that the Calcutta High Court had no choice but to intervene. They handed the case to the CBI just 4 days after the incident.
They saw it too.
Oh, they explicitly flagged the possibility of evidence destruction if the state police continued their investigation. And, this initial institutional incompetence is precisely why the ultimate conviction had to rest almost entirely on the incontrovertible scientific evidence that was collected later on.
Okay, so when the CBI finally took over, they focused on the man who was eventually identified as the perpetrator, Sanjay Roy. And his profile is just key to understanding the hospital's vulnerability. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't even a regular, accountable police officer.
No, and Roy's status really highlights a crucial structural flaw in the state's security apparatus. He was a civic volunteer. He was part of an auxiliary force attached to the Kolkata Police Welfare and Development Redressal Committee.
What does that mean exactly, a civic volunteer?
It means they operate in this kind of gray zone. They often receive patronage, but they lack the formal legal accountability of a regular police officer.
And critically, he wasn't even supposed to be there, was he?
Not officially, no. The sources reveal he was an ex-civic volunteer. He had actually been dismissed from his official role.
Yet he still had access.
He retained privileged access. The evidence showed he was being, quote, pampered by a superior, an assistant sub-inspector named Anup Dutta, and he was illegally using a police barrack and even an official police bike, designated 5021.
So the system of using these auxiliary forces like civic volunteers, it just created this environment.
It absolutely did. It created an environment where an individual like Roy could operate with impunity in a sensitive public space like a hospital, acting as a kind of personal enforcer or a runner for powerful superiors. It's a direct consequence of the systemic decay that allowed this crime to happen in the first place.
We should also briefly touch on his background because it provides some context for the sheer force that was used in the attack.
Yes, it does. The judicial documents noted he was a runner-up in a junior boxing championship back in 2004, and he was known to be right-handed. And this background was later used in court to contextualize the specific, forceful manual pressure that was applied during the throttling. He was physically capable of exerting that kind of extreme force.
Okay, now let's move to the digital footprint. Roy's presence was established through CCTV, but it was one small detail that really locked him to the actual crime. What did that timeline show?
The CCTV evidence was critical, absolutely critical, because it locked Roy into the immediate vicinity during the time the crime was committed. He himself admitted he was on the 3rd floor in the chess department area where the seminar room was, from 4:03 a.m. to 4:31 a.m. on the morning of August 9th.
Which lines up perfectly with the time of death.
Perfectly. The doctor's forensic estimation placed the time of death shortly after 4:45 a.m., and that was based on the contents and the digestion state of the victim's last meal.
So he's there, but what linked him directly to the physical struggle?
This is where meticulous investigation really paid off. It was the detail of the missing earphone.
The earphone.
The earphone. CCTV footage showed Roy entering the trauma center area earlier, around 3:36 a.m., with a helmet in his hand and a small Bluetooth earphone clearly hanging from his neck. When he was later seen exiting the area around 4:31 a.m., the earphone was gone.
And where did the CBI find this crucial item?
It was recovered from under the mattress where the victim was killed.
Under the mattress.
And critically, forensic analysis established what they called continuous pairing between this specific Bluetooth earphone and Roy's seized mobile phone. The expert witness, PW29, testified this was the only device that showed continuous pairing with Roy's mobile over that period.
That is just exceptionally strong circumstantial evidence. What was Roy's defense against that?
He denied it. He claimed his earphone was a different brand. When he was asked under examination how this device, which was, continuously paired with his phone, ended up under the mattress next to the victim, he can only offer vague denials. He just said, "I cannot say."
I cannot say. Not a great defense.
No. And the judicial interpretation of this point is also important. The defense tried to suggest the earphone's location under the mattress was suspicious.
That it could have been planted.
Exactly. That it could have been planted later to frame him. But the judge dismissed this with a very practical explanation. They looked at the crime scene photos. The mattress was thin, the day surface was smooth. The judge called this the cushioning effect.
The cushioning effect.
Yes. During the violent struggle, and given the forceful pushing and asphyxia, the mattress could have easily shifted on that smooth dais, causing the small earphone to slide underneath without any effort. And that explanation just neutralized the defense's attempt to introduce suspicion.
So however strong the circumstantial evidence was, the ultimate confirmation, it came from the gold standard, DNA. And that level of scientific evidence is it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to argue against in court.
It was the final, incontrovertible link that just cemented the case. The DNA analysis established a definitive, multi-layered connection between Roy and the victim.
What were the specific points?
Okay, so firstly, Roy's full DNA profile was matched to saliva found on the victim's nipple swab. This is direct, specific contact evidence of the assault.
Right.
Secondly, the victim's blood DNA profile was found on multiple items belonging to Roy, specifically his seized jeans and his footwear.
On his clothes and shoes.
Yes. And thirdly, short hair strands, designated XF2, that were recovered from the scene, also matched Roy's DNA profile.
The presence of the victim's blood on his clothing and footwear is especially damning. A defense needs a credible, innocent explanation for that, or the court has to assume guilt.
And that explanation just never materialized. During his cross-examination, under the legal provision that allows the accused to explain the evidence against them, Roy claimed for the first time that officers had examined his clothing via video call while he was in custody.
Which sounds unlikely.
The court noted the claim was completely unsubstantiated and was raised far too late in the process. So the judge concluded that Roy failed entirely to provide a credible or reasonable explanation for why the victim's blood DNA would be on his clothing. And that failure, combined with the Bluetooth pairing and the saliva evidence, it just heavily weighed against him. It solidified the chain of evidence beyond any reasonable doubt.
The forensic foundation was rock solid.
Rock solid. It's a credit to the CBI's later investigation efforts, especially despite all that earlier police sabotage.
The forensic details which were provided by the autopsy, they didn't just confirm the perpetrator's identity, they also painted a truly terrifying picture of the sheer force and brutality the victim had to endure.
The autopsy was essential. It conclusively established the cause of death as unequivocally homicidal. It was due to manual strangulation or throttling, which was associated with smothering.
So he wasn't just squeezing her neck.
No. It means the attacker not only used immense force to squeeze her neck, but also forcefully covered her mouth and nose at the same time, most likely to prevent her from screaming.
And the specific injuries detailed exactly how that force was applied.
The findings were grim. The post-mortem noted a fractured thyroid cartilage.
And what does that suggest?
It strongly suggests that pressure was applied forcefully over her mouth and throat. There were clear nail marks from multiple fingers, consistent with manual throttling and subconjunctival hemorrhage.
The broken blood vessels in the eyes.
Exactly. Those telltale small broken blood vessels in the eyes, which are a classic medical sign of violent asphyxia due to compression. This was a sustained, forceful, and brutal process.
And this wasn't a sudden, quiet attack. The evidence indicates she put up a determined fight even though she was exhausted.
Absolutely. The medical evidence pointed directly to a vigorous struggle. She was found with multiple defensive injuries.
Like what?
Scratches on her face, injuries to her lips, and marks on her right hand and fingers. And the physical evidence from her clothing, it corroborated this intense resistance. Her spectacle lens was detached, and her kertie was noted as being torn due to sudden pulling up.
So she fought back hard.
She did. The autopsy concluded she was likely half asleep when the attack began, which explains why the assailant gained that initial control, but she fought back fiercely against him.
And beyond the murder itself, the forensic team provided clear evidence of sexual assault, which was a critical component of the charges brought against Roy.
Yes, the forensic team confirmed sexual assault with clear indications of forceful penetration or insertion that resulted in genital trauma. But here is perhaps the most crucial forensic detail that establishes the nature of the violence: the presence of extravasated blood.
Could you elaborate on why extravasated blood is so critical in this context?
It's a crucial distinction for forensic clarity. Extravasated blood means blood had leaked out of the vessels and into the tissue. In layman's terms, it's bruising. Bruising requires a pumping heart to occur, because the pressure of the beating heart is what forces the blood into the damaged tissue.
So finding it proves.
Finding extravasated blood conclusively proves that the victim was alive during the act of penetration and insertion. She was still fighting for her life when the sexual violence began.
That's horrifying.
Furthermore, the doctors noted the injuries suggested perverted sexuality and genital torture. Bite marks were also noted on the right side of her neck, which forensic analysis confirmed were consistent with human bite marks. The totality of the physical evidence indicated the sexual violence was committed by a single person in a single prolonged transaction.
It sounds just unbelievably brutal. But when we look at the legal process, how do forensic surgeons balance the need to detail this level of violence against the risk of sensationalizing the evidence in court?
That is the perpetual challenge in these high-profile cases. The forensic report, it has to be clinically precise. It has to detail the mechanism of injury without injecting emotion. In this case, the level of detail was necessary to establish the intent, the force, and the specific nature of the crime, which directly countered any residual attempts by the defense to suggest a less violent, consensual, or non-homicidal event.
So the facts speak for themselves.
The facts of the fracture, the extravasated blood, the defensive wounds, they spoke for themselves. They provided a clear, objective narrative of murder following sexual assault.
Now, we really must address the intense rumors that immediately polluted the public discourse right after the tragedy. Public anger fueled a lot of sensational and ultimately false claims.
We saw an immense amount of pollution from fake news and rumors on social media, and it was often driven by a sense of confirmation bias. People were so sure the system was corrupt that they accepted any fact that proved their worst fears.
And the forensic reality directly countered the most sensational of these claims.
It did.
What were some of the specific rumors that were debunked?
Okay, so firstly, the widely circulated claim that the victim's pelvic bone was broken was false. The post-mortem report confirmed there was no such fracture.
And the second, more sensational one.
That was the rumor that the victim was gang raped, with these wild claims like 151 grams of semen from 3 individuals was found.
Which was completely untrue.
Completely. Both the CBI investigation and the court explicitly concluded the act was committed by a single person, Sanjay Roy. And that claim about 151 grams of semen was impossible. A police source clarified that it's visually and scientifically impossible to distinguish or quantify semen from multiple individuals with the naked eye during a standard autopsy.
So that rumor really underscores how false information, often amplified by understandable outrage, can severely complicate the public's initial understanding of the facts.
Absolutely.
So despite all that initial chaos and the institutional sabotage, the CBI delivered a strong enough case to secure a rapid conviction. Let's map out that final judicial process.
The CBI filed a preliminary charge sheet against Sanjay Roy on October 7, 2024, which showed remarkable speed, really, given the complexity of the cover-up they had to navigate.
And the trial was also fast.
It proceeded rapidly, culminating in Roy's conviction on January 18, 2025. He was found guilty of rape and murder under the new laws.
Following that conviction, the crucial decision was the sentencing. And the prosecution, representing the CBI and the complainant's family, they pushed hard for the ultimate penalty.
They did. They sought capital punishment, arguing vehemently that this was a rarest of rare case, which is the benchmark required for the death penalty in India.
And their arguments were compelling.
They were. They cited the extreme brutality of the attack, the vulnerability of the victim who was on duty in what should have been a safe place, a hospital, and the profound societal impact the crime had, shocking the conscience of the nation.
And the court ultimately disagreed. They sentenced Roy to rigorous imprisonment for the remainder of his natural life. Why did the judge rule that this exceptionally brutal crime did not meet that rarest of rare threshold?
The judge employed significant judicial restraint here. They adhered strictly to the precedent set by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the death penalty. The fundamental principle is that life imprisonment is the rule and death is the exception.
So it's a very high bar to clear.
An extremely high bar. The court's reasoning focused on proportionality. They had to balance the aggravating circumstances, which were immense, against mitigating factors, and critically, they had to consider the possibility of reformation. The judge emphasized that the court must resist the temptation to bow to public outcry, prioritizing constitutional morality over public sentiment.
So even though the crime was horrific.
Right. While the severity was acknowledged, the court ruled that the case did not meet the absolute threshold necessary to withdraw the protection of life from the offender, even one who committed such a heinous act.
So the judicial process successfully caged the individual perpetrator, Sanjay Roy. But the larger narrative of this case is the staggering failure of the institutions surrounding him. What was the outcome for those powerful institutional figures accused of evidence tampering and corruption?
And here is where the failure of the system truly becomes apparent, and the narrative takes a very dark turn. The CBI had arrested two key institutional figures: the former principal, Sandeep Ghosh, and the Tala PS officer in charge, Abhijit Mondal,
And they were arrested
for alleged evidence tampering, actively misleading investigators, and the institutional negligence that compromised the crime scene. Ghosh was also facing serious but separate allegations of running a medical mafia involved in illicit activities.
Did those charges result in a sustained prosecution?
Shockingly, no, at least not initially. Both Ghosh and Mondal were granted what is known as default bail.
Default bail, that term is crucial.
It is. It means they walked free, not because they were exonerated or found innocent, but because the Central Bureau of Investigation, the apex investigative agency in the country, failed to file a charge sheet in the larger conspiracy case against them within the mandatory 90-day period required by law.
So a simple bureaucratic procedural mistake. The CBI just missed an absolute deadline. And that allowed the high-profile individuals accused of actively undermining justice to walk free.
That is the precise definition and the consequence of default bail in this context. It was a procedural loophole that delivered a victory to the accused, and it immediately devastated public trust.
It just reinforces that painful perception that there's institutional protection for those in power.
It does, while the individual who was given that unchecked power, Roy, was justly locked away. The judge in Roy's trial had already severely criticized the Tala PS officers for showing a very indifferent attitude from the very inception and engaging in illegal indifferent acts.
But despite that strong judicial finding,
Despite that, the procedural failure of the CDI meant these officials did not face the immediate accountability the public was demanding.
and that contrast between Roy's life sentence and the procedural freedom for the alleged conspirators, that became the central indictment of the system itself.
It did. The CBI continues to investigate the greater conspiracy to commit this crime and hush up the matter. But that initial lapse was just unforgivable in the eyes of the public.
When the institutions failed so visibly, the response from the citizenry was furious and immediate. This case was not confined to the courtrooms. It sparked a massive mobilization across India.
The scale of the outrage was truly unprecedented. It began with the medical fraternity itself. Doctors nationwide suspended their services, demanding justice for their colleague and calling for better security in all hospitals.
They took it to a national level.
They petitioned the Union Health Minister to introduce a special central law aimed specifically at preventing violence against healthcare workers.
And the movement, it broadened really quickly beyond professional solidarity into a powerful social protest about women's safety in public and professional spaces.
It transformed into a massive social justice movement. The most iconic examples were the Reclaim the Night demonstrations. Women came out onto the streets in huge numbers, organizing protests across approximately 300 places in West Bengal alone.
And what was the goal?
The goal was to reclaim public spaces, demanding the right to safety, dignity, and access to all environments, day or night. The sight of thousands of citizens mobilizing like this put enormous pressure on the state.
And that pressure, inevitably, it brought a sharp political edge to the national conversation, which sometimes resulted in friction.
That's unavoidable when a tragedy highlights such profound governance failures. The protests took a sharp political turn, specifically the Nibbana Abhijan rally, which was the march organized by opposition parties to the West Bengal Secretariat.
And that led to clashes.
It did. Significant clashes with law enforcement, who used water cannons and tear gas. Both police officials and protesters were injured, which further heightened the statewide tension until the Supreme Court had to intervene, appealing for calm.
When we talk about the systemic response, that Supreme Court intervention was an extraordinary step. They intervened directly in a way they rarely do in a local crime.
They took suo motu cognizance.
Meaning they initiated it themselves.
Exactly. They initiated legal proceedings entirely on their own, without waiting for a formal appeal. They issued heavy criticism against the state government, the Kolkata police, and the college administration for the demonstrable mishandling of the case.
But they did more than just criticize.
They did. More importantly, the Supreme Court mandated a proactive national response, the formation of a national task force, or NTF, to ensure workplace safety for doctors nationwide.
And what was the NTF tasked with specifically? What were its key suggestions?
The NTF, which included prominent medical professionals and high-level members like the cabinet secretary, was instructed to overhaul hospital security. Their suggestions were direct responses to the failures at RG Carr. They included dramatically improved CCTV camera coverage, stricter access control protocols.
Addressing how a dismissed civic volunteer could just roam freely.
Exactly. And better protocols for checking on staff, especially during those long, vulnerable shifts. It was a systemic effort to close the security gaps that Roy exploited.
The most profound and lasting impact of this case, however, was the resulting legislative reform.
Yes, a landmark achievement. In response to the outcry, the West Bengal government introduced the Aparhida Woman and Child Bill, 2024, which was passed unanimously. This made West Bengal the first state to proactively amend central laws related to crimes of a sexual nature.
And what were the key innovations and stricter measures that were introduced by this bill?
The primary goal was fast-track justice. The bill mandated that investigations for these serious crimes must be completed in just 21 days, and trials must conclude within 30 days.
That's an incredibly fast timeline.
It's a radical push, intended to overcome the long delays that often lead to witness fatigue and the erosion of evidence.
And it also introduced stricter penalties.
Significantly stricter. The death penalty for rape resulting in the victim's death or a vegetative state, and life imprisonment without parole for other serious sexual offenses. It was a clear, tough legislative message.
But implementing justice at that kind of speed, it always raises critical questions about due process and fairness, doesn't it? Did the legal community express concerns about that 2,130-day mandate?
Absolutely. This raises an important question that legal experts continuously debate. Critics immediately expressed concern that mandating such rapid timelines could compromise the quality of the investigation, potentially leading to judicial errors or even wrongful convictions due to pressure.
Because speed can't come at the cost of fairness.
Exactly. A robust investigation takes time, especially in complex cases involving forensic science and potential conspiracy. A balance has to be maintained between the victim's right to swift justice and the accused's right to a fair defense.
Finally, we have to circle back to the institutional context here. The crime itself appears to be symptomatic of a much larger, darker decay within that medical college system.
That is the underlying pathology. The sources highlighted deep-seated corruption, including severe allegations against the former principal, Sandeep Ghosh, that went far beyond just this case. He was accused of running a powerful medical mafia involved in illicit activities like biomedical waste management rackets, drug rackets, and even allegations concerning cadaver sales.
So this illustrates a culture of impunity.
A culture of what experts call everyday injustice. It's not just about one bad apple. It's about a systemic, low-level tolerance for unchecked power, administrative neglect, and the illegal use of state resources. This culture of decay created the perfect environment where an individual like Sanjay Roy, a dismissed civic volunteer, pampered by his superiors, could operate with impunity and use the hospital as his personal domain.
So the crime was a lethal manifestation of this institutional rot.
A rot that had been allowed to fester for years due to administrative and political collusion.
And the structure that allowed Roy to operate was the very same structure that then tried to cover up the crime.
Correct. The crime, the attempted cover-up by the principal and the police, and the procedural failure by the CBI that granted default bail to the high-profile accused, they were all interlocking symptoms of the same profound crisis of governance. The systemic rot made the hospital unsafe, it enabled the crime, and then it attempted to hide the truth.
This deep dive has really shown the remarkable clarity that was achieved by forensic science in a case just shrouded by institutional failure. The evidence that continuously paired Bluetooth earphone found under the mattress, the DNA matching Roy's saliva on the victim, the blood evidence on his clothing, it was definitive. It secured the conviction and the life sentence for Sanjay Roy.
But the fight for justice was nearly crushed by the negligence, the apathy, and the potential active collusion of institutional powers. The former principal and the officer in charge of the local police who actively compromised the crime scene and manipulated documentation, they both regained their freedom due to a simple procedural failure by the CBI.
just missing the mandatory 90-day deadline for filing the charge sheet in the larger conspiracy case.
That's all it took.
And the stark contrast is just chilling. The individual perpetrator, Sanjay Roy, is confined for the remainder of his life. But the institutional figures responsible for compromising the scene, for attempting to manipulate the truth, and for fostering that culture of impunity, they walked free because of bureaucratic incompetence.
The CBI does continue to probe the greater conspiracy to commit this crime and hush up the matter. But the existence of politicized auxiliary forces, the allegations of a medical mafia, they all underscore that the pathology of this case lies in a systemic failure where power is completely decoupled from accountability.
We did see immediate, decisive legislative reform.
We did. The Aprehita Bill and the creation of the National Task Force. And yet the critical question for you, the learner, remains. When a state's institutions actively fail in their primary duty of care and attempt to suppress vital evidence through administrative fraud and negligence, as the police and hospital leadership did here, how can we ensure that the powerful individuals responsible for this institutional failure face accountability that is as robust and consequential as the life sentence delivered to the individual perpetrator? The case of the RG car tragedy proves that the battle for systemic integrity is far from over.
Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.